Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about a crime thriller called Centaur from 2022. Enjoy your viewing. The movie is set in Spain. At the beginning of the movie, we meet the main character Rafa. At the time, Rafa is preparing to participate in the qualifying rounds of the World Superbike Championship. Rafa is a divorced man who has a son. He is very ambitious and wants to become Valentino Rossi's successor in the MotoGP Championship. The race started, and all the riders looked tense and excited. Each of them had one goal: to be the best. Rafa was riding a Kawasaki, which has above-average capabilities. In the middle of the race, Rafa was able to overtake several riders and took the first place. But in the last 2 laps, his bike had engine problems. Rafa was disappointed, as it seemed that his dream of becoming a superbike racer would be dashed, which meant that he would have to wait another year to take part in the qualifying events. But out of the blue, he was contacted by Regina, a talent scout from the Honda team, and invited him to join her team. He accepted the offer and said he would arrive in time to participate in the selection. When Rafa returned from the competition, he was late to pick up his son, which upset his ex-wife Natalia. Rafa and Natalia had previously agreed that their son Matteo would spend the weekend playing with his father. They did this so that Matteo could develop well, both physically and psychologically. When we arrived at Rafa's home, we saw various trophies that Rafa had won at motocross and motorcycle championships. This proved that Rafa really has a talent for riding motorcycles. Rafa shows his son a video of himself on the racetrack. The next day, Rafa takes Matteo home. Rafa invites Natalia for a walk to rekindle their relationship, which has long since faded. He hopes for a reconciliation, but Natalia firmly refuses. She claims that all this time Rafa has been putting his motorcycle first, not his family. In the following days, Rafa shows up at Regina's invitation to take part in the selection for the position of the main rider of the Honda team, where he was to compete with 3 other riders, all quite young and confident. Regina explains that the selection process consists of 4 rounds and will take place regularly over the next few weeks. The first round of selection begins. Rafa, riding a Honda CBR motorcycle, easily took first place, and this brought a smile to Regina's face as she was sure that her decision to take Rafa on the team was the right one. After the competition, Rafa rushes home to Natalia to tell her the good news, but to his surprise, Natalia's house is in disarray, which causes him to panic. Then it turns out that Natalia works for a drug delivery service. Natalia works for a dealer named Carlos, but unfortunately, the 200,000 euros worth of drugs she was supposed to deliver got lost in an unknown location, and this takes her by surprise. Without hesitation, Rafa takes Natalia and Matteo to her home for their safety. After the incident with Natalia, Rafa looks very upset. He feels sorry for Natalia because she is also the mother of his son. In preparation for the meeting with Carlos, Rafa starts looking for information from his best friend Cortez. After receiving the information from his friend, Rafa goes to Carlos's base to discuss with him the problems his ex-wife is facing. Initially, Carlos refused to negotiate with Rafa, saying that he did not want to waste his time. Rafa then decided to go home to figure out another way to pay Natalia's debt. When he returns home, he unexpectedly receives a phone call from one of Carlos's men asking him to come to a tattoo parlor on the outskirts of town. When he arrives there, Carlos's henchman, Boro, orders him to get into a car and drives him somewhere. After a while, the car with Rafa arrives at the port of Marseille to pick up a package of drugs. Apparently, Rafa has to deliver the package to a tattoo parlor. To do this, he has a massive motorcycle, a Kawasaki Ninja. Rafa has to fill the gas tank in a certain place and also find the safest way to avoid the police. Without hesitation, Rafa gets on his motorcycle and follows the orders. On the way, Rafa encounters a problem. He is being chased by police patrolling the highway. It seems that the police are taking their duties seriously. They have come in a Nissan GTR to chase Rafa. Thanks to his excellent racing skills, Rafa manages to outwit the cops and arrive at the tattoo parlor on time. Who could have guessed that the package Rafa was carrying was not drugs, but flour? Carlos did it on purpose to test Rafa's abilities. Later, Carlos asked Rafa to be his courier for 2 months so that he could pay off Natalia's debt. Rafa accepts the job without hesitation. Carlos gives him his cell phone and asks him to be ready if Carlos needs him. The next morning, Rafa goes to work as usual. Rafa tries to balance his time between his job as a drug courier and motorcycle racing. Finally, the day of the second round of selection for the Honda team arrives, and Boro waits for the boy at the selection site, but Rafa does not answer his phone. Boro takes him to a tattoo parlor and instructs Rafa to deliver a package to a certain address. Over and over again, Rafa is interrupted by the police, who receive a report that a very suspicious Kawasaki Ninja is racing down the street. Rafa started to worry as the distance between him and his pursuers was getting smaller and smaller. His heart was beating very fast, but he was lucky. Finally, he was able to hide between some parked cars. Then he quickly ran down the short road he managed to find. Rafa arrived at Carlos's house and complained about the power of the Kawasaki Ninja motorcycle he was riding. He asked Carlos to provide him with another motorcycle, a 1000cc Kawasaki with racing tires, so that he could deliver the package faster. After returning from the drug dealer, Rafa comes home and tells Natalia that the problems with Carlos were solved thanks to the help of his best friend Cortez. Rafa deliberately concealed his deal with Carlos because he didn't want Natalia to worry. At his previous request, Rafa received a more powerful Kawasaki motorcycle. This motorcycle is known for its super speed and powerful engine. Rafa's many trips exhausted him, and he eventually succumbed to the drugs Boro gave him. Rafa uses drugs to get extra energy to keep up with his 3 jobs as a factory worker, motorcycle rider, and drug courier. Days passed, and the third round of selection of potential riders was about to begin. Rafa looks very enthusiastic, although he is not in the best shape. While riding on the track, Rafa encountered one of the riders and got into an argument with him. The rider believed that Rafa had intentionally harmed him, but Rafa firmly stated that he was not cheating. Eventually, Regina managed to end the argument between them. Later that evening, when Rafa returned home, he was surprised to see Natalia packing her things and intending to leave his house. Rafa pleads with her and Mateo not to leave him, and hopes that Natalia will stay to improve the relationship between them. The next day, Rafa is again tasked with delivering a package to a client in the city center. To his surprise, Rafa finds out that there is a big protest going on in the area, and the police are everywhere to ensure the safety of the event. Carlos comes up with a crazy idea. He asks Rafa to ride through the crowd on his motorcycle. Rafa has no other choice, whether he likes it or not, but he has to deliver a customer's order. The guy bravely makes his way on his motorcycle through the ranks of protesters and police. A policeman fires a bullet at him, and Rafa falls down, but fortunately he is still in good condition. Then he runs as fast as he can to save himself. Feeling threatened, Rafa calls Boro and asks him to come and get him because he believes that the people who are chasing him are very dangerous. Rafa again runs as fast as he can to find Boro's car. Thanks to their cooperation, Rafa is rescued, and Boro drives him away from the scene. Upset by what happened to Rafa, Carlos blames Boro's cousin Valder for the incident. However, Boro denies it, saying that his cousin would never do such a thing. Finally, Natalia finds out that Rafa became a drug courier to pay off all of her debts. Natalia realized that all this time Rafa had been sacrificing a lot, and it made her think. They decided to meet again. The next day, Rafa went to the racetrack to take part in the last stage of the Honda team's rider selection. At the beginning of the race, Rafa dominates the race, but in the middle of the track, Rafa mistakenly chooses the wrong lane. Rafa's mistake disappointed Regina, because she expected more from him. To take out his frustration, Rafa decides to complete one last task, to deliver a package of drugs. Arriving at the place in an old building, Rafa meets Boro, who is ready to receive the money from the client. Rafa is about to leave, believing that he has done his job. Suddenly, Boro asks him to come back tomorrow morning to deliver another package. Rafa gets upset. He feels like he is being used. Rafa angrily walks up to Boro, takes his helmet, and then hits Boro hard with the helmet. Rafa then calls Cortez and asks him to help hide Boro's body. Rafa makes a deal with Cortez. He will tell him the location of Carlos's drug warehouse so that Cortez can take over Carlos's business. Cortez readily agrees to the deal because he also hated Carlos. Meanwhile, Carlos went to Rafa's house to ask about Boro's whereabouts. Rafa made up a story, saying that Boro was a traitor, and that he and his cousin had taken Carlos's money. Carlos believed Rafa and took the boy with him to find Boro and Valder. Along the way, Carlos senses that someone is following him, so he decides to turn around and go to his warehouse to secure the packages of drugs. Once there, Rafa sends his location to Cortez with a request to come and pick him up. After a while, one of Carlos's men said that Rafa had lied. Boro and Valder did not take Carlos's money because Valder is now in prison. After receiving this information, Carlos became angry because Rafa lied to him. He plans to kill Rafa by shooting him. Rafa realizes that he is in danger and tries to escape. He escapes on a motorcycle, and Carlos chases him in a car. Rafa crashes into a forklift and falls. Carlos loads him into the trunk of his car and drives off to find Boro and his missing money. Luckily, Rafa finds his cell phone in Carlos's pocket and asks Cortez for help. After receiving a message from Rafa, Cortez decides to stop Carlos immediately and rescue Rafa. When Carlos leaves the warehouse, he is suddenly hit by a large truck. He is trapped and unable to get out of the car. In a moment, Cortez comes to Rafa's aid. Cortez then shoots Carlos to death. At the end of the story, Rafa successfully solves all his problems and is reunited with his wife and son. Regina invites him to join her team because she believes that Rafa is exactly the kind of rider the Honda team needs. However, when Rafa meets Regina, 2 policemen suddenly appear and arrest Rafa. Regina is surprised by Rafa's arrest. At the police station, Rafa is interrogated about his involvement in a drug cartel network. But instead of throwing him in jail, the police offer him a job. He will help the police dismantle a drug syndicate. Rafa agrees without any hesitation. To fulfill his duties, he asks for a Kawasaki motorcycle with racing tires. If you have watched the video so far, you should know that I am happy to have viewers like you. Thank you for watching to the end. Subscribe to the channel and follow the news. Klontsak Recapped was with you. See you soon.